All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. Yesterday, we had a live practice between the Los Angeles Rams and the Dallas Cowboys. Our first look of this Cowboys team against some opposition, some good opposition in the Los Angeles Rams. Some good things happen, some not so good things happen, some positivity, and a lot of wake-up calls as well. And I'll get to all of that reporting and what it means going forward for the Cowboys. But first, as we always do, let's get a little palate cleanser going. Let's start with our stat of the day, our chart of the day, which will also double as my make fun of the big time media post of the day. This was what was posted on X a few days ago by Dan Orlovsky, who generally is not a bad guy on ESPN, right? There's a lot of really bad personalities on ESPN. Orlovsky is usually not one of them, but here he steps out of the zone here and gets something incredibly incorrect. He posted, cap hit this season, Dak Prescott, $50.5 million, Jalen Hurts plus A.J. Brown plus Devontae Smith, $46.9 million, unserious versus serious. Now, Orlovsky, he's a media guy. He's a football guy. He doesn't understand numbers. He doesn't understand business. He didn't take 2 seconds to do the extra research to understand it. Anyone who follows Philadelphia at all with what they do with their contracts, understand that they utilize void year dollars more than anybody else. They use it to the extreme. Void year dollars are basically putting salary cap hits on years where that player is no longer playing on your team. So if you have a guy that has a void year cap hit, that's say in 2030, he'll count against your cap in 2030, but he won't be under contract that year. So he'll either be playing for somebody else and you'll owe him cap dollars, or you'll basically have to pay him twice, right? His void year cap hit plus the actual cap hit for his salary and signing bonus and things like that. And that's what I highlighted in my response to Orlovsky. You can see it below at the Twitter account for our company, the SMI Football Show. Void year dollars, Dak Prescott, $10.6 million. Jalen Hurts plus A.J. Brown plus Devontae Smith, $166.8 million. Philly borrowed from the future to win now. I say borrowed, I meant borrowed. Little typo there. Shows how smart I am half the time. It worked, obviously. They won the Super Bowl last year, but the bill will come due. The bill always comes due, right? I know a lot of people say, well, the salary cap will keep going up and up and up, and it'll keep going exponentially increasing. Maybe it will, but if it doesn't grow exponentially, or if it stops growing dramatically, or if it stops growing at all, teams that use void year dollars are going to be in a world of hurt. There's a very real situation that by the year 2029, the Philadelphia Eagles will have to pay, if they have these 3 guys on the roster, $230 million just to have all these 3 guys on the roster. Even with salary cap growth, you're looking at 65% of your cap allocated to 3 good players, but it's not like we're looking at the best quarterback in football. Jalen Hurts isn't. We're not looking at the best wide receiver in football. Both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith aren't even close. They're really good players, don't get me wrong, but they're not close to the top of the list there. So while it worked that the Philadelphia Eagles borrowed so heavily from the future to pay for yesterday's success, and they deserve a lot of credit for doing so. I hate Philadelphia, but they deserve the credit. The reality is, looking at the cap hit like Orlovsky's doing here is just a guy who doesn't understand numbers, who doesn't understand salary caps. He's just, again, talking head on ESPN. He knows quarterback play. I highly recommend him for that kind of stuff, but here he gets it wrong. All right, let's get into the news of the day, and that was the joint practice between the Cowboys and Los Angeles Rams. To start with Tommy Yarish, he had a lot of great notes. We'll go through a lot of different stuff here. Just bear with me. Overall, certainly not the best day for the Cowboys on either side of the ball. Offensively, the run game struggled to get much going. Defensively, Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, and Tutu Atwell had a lot of success for the Rams. Yeah, there was a lot of discussion on social media and a lot of reporting that the Cowboys did not run the ball very successfully against the Rams, at least for the first 2/3 of the joint practice. And look, let's be totally honest. Their starting left tackle was out, right? Tyler Smith, very limited, did not play much at all. So they were basically dealing with an entire backup left side of the offensive line. They have a rookie right guard, rookie running backs, new scheme against a Rams front 7 that's ferocious, deep, talented, and has played together for a few years now. That's a mismatch waiting to happen. To be totally honest, if the Cowboys had dominated in the running game, I would have been incredibly shocked. And look, as the practice actually wore on, and the passing game, which was great all day by Prescott, Milton, even though he got hurt, which we'll cover in just a second, was great all game long. As the practice wore on and the Rams started to adjust a little bit to the passing game, the running game opened up a little bit, as it tends to. So I know a lot of people are really worried about how bad the running game looked. And look, it was a wake-up call. Long way to go for this rushing attack. Not even close to where it needs to be. It wasn't all doom and gloom there. I think there's still some things to work on, especially considering rookie right guard, who's only going to get better. Tyler Smith, their best offensive lineman, one of their 2 or 3 best players, wasn't playing. And of course, the backup left tackle, getting his first live experience in competition in 800 plus days in Nate Thomas, considering the competition they were going against. Kind of what you would expect. Definitely a good learning experience there. The second point there, that Dak Prescott to George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb connections are as advertised. LA's corners had trouble with them, and you can tell it's opened things up for Dallas this season since you can only do so much to cover them both. This was the big takeaway to me when you look at all the reports. People said Dallas still can't run the ball very well, still struggling to stop the run. Injuries at corner are a problem. But the reality is this passing game by Dallas, Pickens, Ferguson, Lamb, Turpin, who had a great day, even Tolbert and Mingo in some isolated incidences. When you look at what they're doing with Prescott, elite level stuff. I talked about it before, I think about a week ago. I said the pass catching on this team, the pass catchers, is championship level. The Rams are an elite team. I think, in my opinion, they're the second or third best team in the NFC. People forget, they gave the Eagles the best game of the season. They came this close to beating the postseason. They were driving for a win in the final 2 minutes before they got stopped by Philly's defense deep in Philadelphia territory. And then Philly went on to drop 55 and obliterate Washington, humiliate Washington in the NFC Championship game. And then they, of course, humiliated Kansas City in the Super Bowl. So LA was really the closest team to Philadelphia all postseason long. This is a very good squad, well-coached squad, a lot of great players, and it looks like the Dallas Cowboys passing game can actually overcome the Rams defense. That's a great sign for what they could do going forward. Thought the Cowboys did better against the run than I initially expected. Jack Sanborn and Maris Leafel had some good fits, and Perry and Winfrey had the highlight of the day, bringing down Kyron Williams for loss after beating a double team. Yeah, Perrin Winfrey's a guy that's really starting to really show up. He's sort of the under-the-radar young player that's emerging as a stud for this Cowboys defense. People look at Toya, the rookie, Mazi Smith, things like that. But Winfrey's a guy keep an eye on. If he makes this team, I think he will. He could be a key part in a strictly run defense role. He's doing a lot better than people give him credit for. And how about Maris Leafel continuing to improve, continuing to get better? I think there's a breakout star. We talked about Leafel doing some good things yesterday. He did some good things against the Rams. He's getting better and better. I look to him to be sort of an emerging playmaker in terms of the linebacking core. Sanborn and guys like Murray are kind of the stabilizing influence. Leafel will be more of a playmaker, and when you get Leafel and Overshown in the same group, that's going to be a dynamic duo to watch for many years to come. All right, Yerish went on to report from the practice. Jared Verse is a straight-up monster. The Cowboys' offensive line had their hands full of him and didn't come up with many answers. He's going to be a great player for a long time in this league. Yeah, Verse was already a great player. He's one of the top 4, 5, 6 edge rushers in all football. And obviously going up against a backup left tackle, making his first appearance against live competition in 800-plus days, former 7th-round pick Nate Thomas, that was just a mismatch nightmare. And again, and I'm going to cover this a few times, when you get into these live practices, it's incredibly vanilla, basic stuff. There's no game planning, there's no trickery, right? So basically the Cowboys treated it as if they weren't game planning for Verse, just like the Rams weren't treating it like they were game planning for like CeeDee Lamb or Pickens or something like that. So basically Dallas put their left tackle one-on-one on Jared Verse the entire practice, which you wouldn't do in a game. You'd be offering double team, slide protection, chips, quick game, whatever it may be, screens at him. You'd come up with a game plan strategy to try and slow him down. They don't for these kind of practices for obvious reasons. You don't want to give away too much. You also want to see what players can do, what things against what competition. So understand, even though Verse absolutely had a really great day, dominated the Cowboys' left side of the offensive line, factor in the injuries and also factor in there's no game planning. That's not necessarily an indication that this offense will have issues handling great pass rushers, but it is a wake-up call that this is not a deep team on the offensive line when it comes to the injuries they currently have, right? They can survive, but they aren't good enough. They need their starters, obviously their best players like Tyler Smith, and of course Guyton to return if they want to make a serious run at making any kind of noise this fall. Still a lot of Brock Hoffman at left guard, but Tyler Smith was still suited up. They're being careful with him, but again, nothing serious expected there. Mazi Smith was back in after getting injured yesterday. Cowboys aren't too concerned about Joe Milton, who banged his head on a helmet. So again, nothing serious injury related there. And the final bullet point there I already kind of hit on. The Cowboys were pretty vanilla as expected on both sides of the ball, as the Rams were too. For example, a lot of quick game on offense and not a whole lot of movement from pass rushers, with Donovan Ezraku pretty much exclusively bull rushing and not utilizing any pass rush moves, at least from what I saw. That may change a little bit when they actually get into the preseason game, but yeah, these practices, they keep it very vanilla, very basic, very day one stuff, simple kind of things, no game planning, and that's why you'll get these crazy mismatches. You also get different rotations of guys. So they had, for example, I think Troy Pride Jr., obviously a guy who should be a number 4, number 5 corner because of the injuries at Dallas. They're trying him out and see what roles he could play in one-on-one against Devontae Adams with no safety help in a standard 4-man pass rush, and he got beat over the top for a touchdown. Would that ever happen in a game? Would you ever leave Troy Pride Jr. one-on-one with Devontae Adams without any safety help, And if there was no safety help, you'd be guaranteed you'd be doing some sort of exotic blitz or pressure. Never would happen. They leave him one-on-one without those two things. But it's practice, right? That's why you do these things. So take some of the highlights and the results with a grain of salt. But there is a wake-up call there. This Cowboys team, especially with the injuries in training camp, they've got some flaws. They've got some things to definitely work on as we get closer to the regular season. All right, Kyle Yman's also had his notes. A lot of the same stuff. He said tough day for both units. Rams had success on both fields, not exclusively, but consistently. Corners had a tough time with Adams, Nakua, and Atwell. I think that was a common theme. Defensive front struggled to get pressure. Turner had a sack, though. Again, when you're not doing exotic blitzes, and of course Micah Parsons isn't playing, you're going to get this kind of stuff, right? It's just going to happen, especially when you've got young guys like Ezraku, Sam Williams returning, right? Take that with a grain of salt. I'm not too worried about that. Again, Ezraku, strong bull rush, but didn't utilize moves. That middle point there, Dak was precise in 2-minute drill and end-of-game scenario. That's obviously good to see. That's important for the quarterback. A lot's going to be on Dak Prescott's shoulder this season. Red zone work was won by the Rams defense. That's a little bit of a concern because red zone has been a problem, but I think that's going to take time. When you can't run the football, red zone gets a lot harder. You're working on integrating a new offense, new receiver in Pickens. I'm a little less concerned about that. I think that'll be figured out over time, but red zone is a serious problem. It's been a serious problem for Dallas for a number of years. Lots of flags, including offensive PI against Lamb and Pickens at different times. Run game struggled to find a hole. Blue was the most efficient runner. Turpin was best wide receiver. I disagree with Yman's here, right? CeeDee Lamb had a great game. Pickens made a lot of catches. I think Turpin, because of his mismatched nightmare, when he went up against second and third string with the twos against the Rams, they didn't have an answer for him. Like he had like a catch and run easy touchdown because he's so freaking fast. He's a weapon X that the Cowboys are definitely going to utilize. But one of the things that can happen with these kind of practices, like, oh, player A did really good. Is he a breakout star? Well, he was going against a guy's second and third string. So let's take it with a grain of salt. Or you may see a guy like Jared Verse. Oh, he dominated the entire practice. Well, he was going up against the Cowboys' backup left tackle, and their all-pro left guard was also out for most of the practice. So a little bit of grain of salt with these kind of things, but Turpin did do some good things. So did Lamb. Really, the passing game in general for Dallas was pretty outstanding by all accounts for the day. Again, at the end there, you can see big grab from Jalen Brooks from Milton before Milton's injury ended his practice, right? Do we look at Jalen Brooks as a guy who's going to be a significant big play receiver? No, of course not, right? No, don't get me wrong. I think he's done some good things in the past, and he's a special teams guy, solid backup, practice squad guy, borderline roster. But you don't look at Brooks and you saw him hit a beautiful deep touchdown catch. Do you sit there and say, oh, he's going to be a big part of the Cowboys offense? No, it's practice. He was going up against a second, third string Rams secondary, and he was able to beat him for a big play. So there can be a lot of overreaction to this kind of stuff, but there is reason for concern. The run defense is clearly still a problem. They're going to need guys to really step up, although I think linebackers, as they get better, working with Eberflus should help that a little bit. Offensive line is an issue with the injuries. Running game, look, we knew it was a problem. It's all about getting better. It's important to understand that what's going to happen this year for Dallas, and sort of tempering expectations, is they're going to take their rushing defense and rushing offense that were ranked like bottom 3 in the NFL both last year. Let's say they were just 30th, just to make it easy. The goal this year is to get them up to like 20th, right? Just to improve, to go from really, really bad to just bad. Right? No one is expecting Dallas. I mean, we'll take it, but no one is expecting Dallas to be the 2000 Baltimore Ravens on defense this season. Not even close. You're just trying to get away from being a disaster at stopping the run to just not very good. Same thing with running the football on offense. You just want to go away from a disaster from stopping the run to just not being very good, right? And I think they can do that. We talked about Eberflus with his aggressive playmaking style, forcing takeaways, turnovers, negative plays. None of that against the Rams. Very vanilla, and we'll see a lot of very vanilla kind of stuff in these joint practices. So again, what the Cowboys strategically are going to try to do in terms of stopping the run and generating big plays, they did none of that. So big grain of salt with what Dallas did defensively yesterday, but there are reasons for concern. I think the biggest question for me is they're going to have their big playmakers, Deron Bland, Diggs when he's back. You look at Micah Parsons, of course. You look at guys, even young guys like Ezraku, Fowler, Overshown when he returns later in the season, right? Leofau. All of these guys, they're going to have to make big plays. Deron Bland is specifically got to force turnovers, got to have that forced fumble and recovery to seal the game against Tampa. You're going to need some picks. Diggs, going to need some picks. Parsons, a lot of sacks and pressures, right? Oso Digizua, live up to your contract, a lot of sacks and pressures. They're big name guys, their stars are going to have to make big plays. If they don't, this defense is going to have, honestly, a lot of issues, which I think a lot of us expect. You pay these guys big money, expect them to make big plays. They're the big name guys. They're going to be relied on heavily to help in this Eberflus defense. All right, moving on to some just individual stories here and some good news from Patrick Walker at Voice of the Star. Great follow on Twitter if you're looking for a guy to follow for Cowboys content and Cowboys news. He posted, Tyler Guyton's knee is already off his crutch, and he tells me his knee is responding very well to treatment. That is a good sign. Jerry Jones said later that he's not 100% sure if he'll be ready week 1, but he's progressing well and looking good. So it seems to be, if it may be one of those deals where it's kind of unfortunate, where if Dallas was playing Sunday instead of Thursday, he may be ready to play. He still may be ready to play, but I think at this point, week 2 for New York seems to be like a 95, 99% probability, very high. Still 50-50 on Philly, but it looks like progression is going well for Guyton, and based on what we saw yesterday and the improvement Guyton has had this offseason, I think that's a really good sign for Dallas. Extended missed time for our starting left tackle is never good for obvious reasons. All right, moving on along here. This is from, again, Patrick Walker, Voice of the Star. He said, watch for the hook. Reunited with Matt Eberflus, it's taking no time at all for Malik Hooker to return to peak form thus far throughout Cowboys camp as the veteran safety dominates in Oxnard. He said, I'm very fond of Eberflus's game. One of the things I kind of forgot when it came to Malik Hooker is how well he worked with Eberflus in the past. And there was a time where he was considered, an above average, very good quality safety. He's not a bad player, but with Dallas, he's sort of been just, serviceable. Not bad, not great, a little bit above replacement level. But again, working with a coach he knows and a coach he understands could unlock a lot of his potential. And if you go back to the early 2000s when the Cowboys brought in Bill Parcells as their head coach, he famously, and Parcells did this all the time, had his guys, the Parcells guys that he would bring into the fold on offense, on defense. And while they weren't elite players in terms of all-pro stars, things like that, they were guys he knew he could trust, guys he knew how to utilize effectively. It looks like Malik Hooker will be one of Flus's guys at the safety position. And again, we talk about a defense that's going to need playmakers, guys to step up. If Malik Hooker can have his best season in a few years for Dallas, that will be critical for the Cowboys. Because like I mentioned before, they're going to have a lot of issues stopping the run. Even if they improve, as we all hope they will, from just disastrous to just, bad, which I hope they will. There's still some question marks that'll even make that level of improvement. But even if they accomplish that, they're going to need some good safety play. Malik Hooker stepping up, doing good things with Matt Eberflus is a great sign that could be well on the way. All right, next report here. This is on the Joe Milton injury. So it was first reported, John Machota from The Athletic, and he responded to his tweet. He said, Cowboys quarterback Joe Milton didn't finish practice, appeared to hit his hand on a helmet. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones said he got a full report and it's not anything serious. And then he responded later, Cowboys coach Brian Schottenheimer isn't concerned about quarterback Joe Milton's thumb injury. He said the medical staff feels really good about it. It was precautionary. He felt like he could go back in. That's an important thing to understand about these practices too. So basically, Dallas, as their second string unit, they had Will Greer playing a lot of the practice at the quarterback position, a guy who will be maybe the emergency quarterback for Dallas, right? And that's what can happen in practice. And look, the Rams were out some guys too. Matthew Stafford's not playing, for example. But when you look at these joint practices and you evaluate performance, it's sort of like preseason where if one team's got their third team unit on the field and you've got your second team, or you've got a lot of first team guys and they either got their second team, one team will look really good, one team will look really bad. It's not really indicative of what it's going to look like during the regular season. So when you saw, Will Greer kind of struggle maybe at times, say, oh, the Cowboys offense doesn't look so good these past 5 or 6 plays. Well, that's because you got a third string quarterback in, right? You have any time you get a backup in for this situation, the way a third string is to a second string, you're not going to look nearly as good, right? We saw that last year. Cooper Rush not nearly as good as Dak Prescott. So I'm not saying discount the practice. Like I've said a bunch of times, a lot of red flags, a lot of reason for concern. Rushing defense, still a problem. Running the football, still a problem. Secondary in terms of going up against elite teams, still a problem. I will say this, passing offense looks elite as well. So there's a lot of things that were confirmed on the positive, a lot of things confirmed on the negative, but it all needs to be taken with a grain of salt because both teams vanilla, weird situations with lineups and personnel. So let's wait how this all plays out. I think the first preseason game will be more of the same. Really, as we get deeper into camp and we see what guys become starters and get more reps, we'll get a better feel for what this Cowboys team is actually going to look like structurally for the regular season. All right, last little story here. This was on DallasCowboys.com. You talk about an under-the-radar guy that's emerging. And we're talking about Marshon Neland, and I think this is really important to understand. Marshon Neland is not only making waves in his second NFL and Dallas Cowboys training camp, but he's surfing on the ones he's making. As a second-round pick in 2024, he flashed on tape in his first season, as I've covered. We got a film review on this channel if you want to check it out. But also suffered a knee injury that cost him several games and as a result slowed his progress on the field. It's that mentality to level up that combines with Eberflus's plan and also a points-based system of competitiveness created by the defensive ends room that has Neland finding a sweet spot going into year 2. And for all the joyful trash talking that's been going on between Dante Fowler and rookie Donovan Ezeraku concerning it, as it turns out, it's Neland who says he's leading in points. And that's because he's getting sacks, sure, but also everything else as well. Yeah, this is sort of the secret Marshon Neland that I really liked, and I talked about his film. Is he like a sack master? Is he going to be a guy to get 15 sacks or just be an elite pass rusher? No. But you talk about a guy that I think can grow and is becoming a solid, complete player. To me, if you look at a comp, I know it's not perfect stylistically, but the goal for him to develop is sort of a Greg Ellis kind of guy or an Anthony Spencer kind of guy. I know Anthony Spencer didn't live up to the hype, but when he was at his peak, it was good pass rusher, could deflect the pass, play the inside run, outside run, good all-around player, which I think the Cowboys really lacked last season. They ended up getting Micah Parsons back, but not having DeMarcus Lawrence and obviously the injuries, and really he's past his prime, if we're being totally honest, or at least looked that way early in the season before he got hurt. Not having that defensive end opposite of Parsons to really, help stabilize, be a quality run defender, could rush the passer, push the pocket as well, that was missed. And if Neland can become that kind of player, again, he's not going to play 1,000 snaps. He's going to play his percentage in certain situations. That will be really beneficial for the Dallas Cowboys. I think having a guy, again, okay against the run, okay against the pass, smart player, physical, fast, does his assignment, grades out well, a lot of points. That's a good stabilizing influence. Again, you're not looking for a superstar. You got in Micah Parsons. You got some pass rush specialists in Fowler, Ezeraku, and Williams returning. You got Oso Odigizua inside. You just need now more of a stabilizing influence, a solid all-around the player, and it looks like Marshon Neland could be that for the Dallas Cowboys, which I think is a great sign. They're going to need a lot of guys to step up. They've got some flaws on this defense. They got some flaws on this team, as we saw yesterday in the joint practice, and as we'll see probably over the course of the preseason and during the regular season as well. But I think when you have young guys kind of coming into their own, figuring out their niche in the NFL, that is a great sign. Excited to see this from Marshon Neland. If you go back and look at his film against Cleveland and the New York Giants last year, it's good stuff. The injuries really derailed his development. I'm expecting him to return closer to form and continue to get better this season for the Cowboys. All right, that is all the news that I'm going to cover today. Let's get into the comments from yesterday. This first comment is from Scott Farrar, 3463. Talking about Dak Prescott and his numbers and how it compared favorably to guys like Burrow and Mahomes. When you put a good team around him, Dak can perform. Yes, but how do you put a good team around him when he's taking all the money? Yeah, it's a very fair question, right? And I think this is one of the flaws with the Dak Prescott contract. But I will say that you enter in this weird world, right? Because I know a lot of people say, you got to pay Micah Parsons. You got to pay Micah Parsons. You pay Micah Parsons, then suddenly you're going to have to rely on, not so great pieces around him defensively. We saw this with Trayvon Diggs. Diggs gets a lot of money. You got to rely on a lot of young guys. They had to rely on Kalen Carson last year. They had to bring in a lot of guys off the bench. They had Gilmore coming in for the one-year flyer, right? Deron Bland emerged, which is great. But again, when you pay a guy out of position or in a part of the football so many dollars, it's taking money from other places, right? Unless you use the void years like Philly, which you can, but boy, that's a risk if it doesn't work out. I guarantee you, there's only so much dollars that can go around. I think paying Dak Prescott is sort of one of those things where it's not a win for Dallas, but it's not a loss for Dallas either. Look, I'm still old enough to remember, I'm sure a lot of you guys are as well, how bad things looked with the Chad Hutchinson, Quincy Carter, Clint Sterner kind of days for a long time, even Vinny Testaverde in 2004, and heck, Drew Bledsoe 2005, early 2006. Testaverde and Bledsoe, I think, were better than some of those guys. But the reality is, for a large part, the post-Aikman era was really bad at the quarterback position. They've actually had a lot of stability despite having a number of seasons derailed by injuries. I'm excited what Prescott is doing at the quarterback position this fall in terms of the playmakers around him. I'm expected doing big things. And look, the Cowboys seem to have done it, right? They have Prescott. They signed Ferguson. They signed CeeDee Lamb. They got Turpin on an extension, right? They drafted a lot of guys at the offensive line. You've got Pickens traded. So it sounds like they've created an environment for playmakers around him. Now the rest of the football, when you look at offense, running back, some parts of the offensive line, and defense, it's got some issues. But in terms of surrounding Prescott with weapons, they found a way to get it done. All right, this is from Delta 704. Kind of naive to assume Michael will have zero negative repercussions not practicing and going to camp. Under a new DC and HC, CD held out last season and said it himself affected him negatively. Yeah, I will throw one caveat on there. I think the Lamb negative effective was the fact that he wasn't on the same page with Prescott, right? The timing was off. And that's important to get quarterbacks and receivers on the same page with timing. And I do think there's the risk with that with Parsons in terms of stunts, pressures, gap assignments, things like that. So I don't disagree that there will be zero negative consequences. So I think you're right there. I think you've got a good point there, but I just think they're minimal. And when you look at the young guys on this defense, you look at Ezraku, you look at Neland, they're getting reps, they're getting better. To me, Micah Parsons going through walkthroughs and sitting and not having any not having, I'll say, very little negative consequences is better than having guys like Ezraku and guys like Williams returning and Neland getting fewer reps. So it's one of these weird trade-offs, right? Where would I rather have guys like those three young guys get more reps in practice or have Parsons get more reps in practice? It's a weird dynamic. I'd actually kind of like where they are right now if they can actually get Parsons back into the fold. Parsons doing the walkthroughs, be there mentally, right? Going through game plan, things like that when the regular season comes. And in the meantime, let some of these young defensive ends get more reps and develop. I kind of like that situation. But you bring up a very good point. There won't be zero negative consequences, at least for the first few weeks of the season. There will be some things to work out. There will be some communication issues. That definitely will happen. And look, that's going to happen. You're just going to have to live with that. But to be fair, you can also make the argument that's going to happen anyway, right, with a new defense, because preseason and training camp practices are so limited and so constrained these days. Very few stars play in the preseason. I mean, how many games would Micah Parsons play in the preseason anyway, right? None. So, again, I think you'd actually run into some of those issues anyway, but we'll see how it all shakes out. Really good point there from Delta 704. Stephen Coleman, 3272, said Dak is not the Cowboys' problem. I don't disagree. He's a good player, but the question is for Prescott, can he be the Cowboys' strength? Right. And we saw that in 2023 when he was, and he had that best year of his career. The question is, can he become the Cowboys' strength, the way a true franchise quarterback is, right? Lamar Jackson, Burrow, Josh Allen, right? Those guys are those teams' strengths. Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers in those prime. Those guys are their teams' strength. Matthew Stafford, when he went to the Rams and when he's healthy, is the strength of that offense, right? So I think you look at where Prescott is. Is he more under the Jalen Hurts, Brock Purdy mold, where he's a guy that functions with really good infrastructure and can do great things with that infrastructure? Or is he the team? Is he the star? Is he the linchpin? That is the question. But to be fair, the Cowboys surround him with enough playmakers. We won't know that this year anyway. I think he's closer to the Jalen Hurts mold than he is, say, the Joe Burrow mold. But we'll see how things shake out this season for him in that passing game, which looked really good against the Rams, by the way. People are sleeping on that. But passing is the most important part of today's NFL, and they looked very solid against the Rams defense. So that's an important takeaway that isn't getting a lot of play right now, but I think it's really important to focus on. This next comment here is from someone, I'm going to mispronounce your name, Moshe Dekel, I believe, so correct me if I'm wrong. No quarterback is winning without a good supporting cast or competent coaching and a good defense. Dak has had neither. I'm hoping that he can at least have a competent coaching staff this year, but we'll see. Mahomes has had a Hall of Fame coach, and we see what Mahomes looks like without a good O-line in front of him. It wasn't pretty. Yeah, that's a very fair point, right? If you look at all the Super Bowl winners, I mean, you go Brady, Belichick, you go Mahomes, Andy Reid. You go, Ben Roethlisberger, Mike Tomlin, Ben Roethlisberger, Bill Cowher, right? You go across the line here, Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford, right? The vast majority of them, Drew Brees, Sean Payton, it becomes this world where you need to be really good at coach quarterback or have a crazy good infrastructure. Philadelphia, I think they're good at coach quarterback. I don't think they're great, but they've got a crazy great infrastructure, so they were able to win a title, right? So again, credit where credit is due. I think it was the same thing when the Eagles won the title in 2017, I believe, if I go back on the top of my head, where their infrastructure was crazy. They were okay at quarterback. Nick Foles got hot with a decent coach, right? So if you have a crazy good infrastructure, you can win and win championships. That is true. But that's sort of the anomaly, right? That's not a guaranteed success. The 49ers, great coach, great infrastructure, great GM, 0 championships, right? And a quarterback that's been playing actually pretty well in that system, of course, and Brock Purdy. So when you look at the 49ers, you're like, okay, you can even get infrastructure pretty darn perfect and still lose. The most likely recipe for success is get coach right and quarterback right and build a system around both of those guys with the players. The Cowboys are hopefully doing that with Schottenheimer and Prescott. Time will tell, but at least we're seeing that trend kind of develop. And I think this is where credit needs to be given, I think, to the Cowboys. They at least tried to think that way with Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott. I think that was the goal in 2020. I didn't like the Mike McCarthy hire at the time. I felt like it was a little misguided, but I think they kind of figured it out a little bit with a culture shift as a team leader perspective while also working with Prescott. That's really important. We'll see how it works on Sundays this upcoming fall. But again, I think you're 100% correct. Without the right, even if you have a great quarterback, without a good enough team or good enough coach, you need to have both, right? You can have, if you have a really great quarterback, you maybe need a little less coach and a little less team, but you need to have really good all three categories. Dallas, for the most part of Dak's career, hasn't been great in all of those categories. Maybe 2016 was an exception. I think 2022 was an exception too. So you look at 2 seasons there where those, I kind of put the blame on Prescott, specifically 2022 and his performance against the 49ers with the turnovers, only scoring 12 points. I think that's more on Dak than anything else. But for the most part, you're correct. The Cowboys have had a lot of flaws during Prescott's tenure. All right, this is from Monte Murdoch 5032. Last comment here. I do disagree with your comment on Mazi Smith. Though the man to me is not giving his all in practice, I believe it's been said before that if you don't go full go during that, you're subject to getting injuries. Also, again, he said himself he doesn't like football, just hitting. That's why I don't think he makes the cut this year. Yeah, I mean, for me, Mazi Smith, I don't know. I can't look into his heart. I can't read his mind. He's made the comments like you mentioned, and that's a very fair point. I just think for me, just looking at what he's doing on the field and how he's playing, both in terms of effort and production, it just isn't there when you have guys like Winfrey, when you have Oso Digizua and Solomon Thomas inside at the 3 technique, the defensive tackle. You have Toya making some plays. Maybe he finds a way to make it as sort of the 3rd string guy, but I think at this point it's almost better to cut your losses and just roll with a bunch of young guys and see who fits and see who emerges, right? I'm almost kind of leaning in that direction right now. Again, I'm not rooting for Mazi. I'm rooting against Mazi Smith. I'm rooting for him. I hope he does well. It just doesn't look good. The trend certainly is not his friend the way it sits right now. Okay, that's, like I said, all the comments. There's going to be more news this week. Of course, we got preseason football right around the corner. We're going to get some film reviews. So all of these Cowboys rookies we've been talking about, I'm going to do deep dives on the All-22 in the coming weeks throughout the preseason. That'll continue in the regular season. So make sure you stay tuned for that. A lot of great stuff coming. But until next time, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.